Last time, on Blind Date, Carrie Hart had just broke Sal Murdoch's leg during a scrimmage game. Sal was the Panthers' star quarterback. It was a complete accident, but everyone thinks he did it intentionally to take his spot as number one. But Carrie doesn't even care about football. He was only playing because his older brother Donald was on the team, and now the coach is telling him he's off the team because of an accident? As Carrie walks home with his best friend Josh, a car filled with some of the players from the football team start to warn him to watch his back. Also in the car is Sharon Spinner, Sal's girlfriend. She threatens him, telling him that she will pay him back for what he's done to Sal. Carrie's life had changed a lot in the past year since his brother Donald had left. His parents had divorced, and his whole family had slowly grown apart. But Carrie can't seem to remember anything about the past year, and for some reason no one wants to talk about what happened either. He lives with his father, police officer Lieutenant Hart, and his younger brother Sean. That night, Carrie gets a phone call from a girl claiming to be his blind date. She tells him it was set up by an old friend of his. She seemed mysterious on the phone. She quickly tells him that her name is Amanda and gives him her address before hopping off the phone. Carrie gets another strange call that night at 1 o'clock in the morning. A strange voice repeating weird phrases like, "Sticks and stones can break your bones." He believes the strange calls are coming from Sharon Spinner. He tries to ignore the strange calls and enjoy his blind date. But when it comes time for the date, Carrie feels like something isn't right. The house looks abandoned and run down. When Carrie goes up to the door, he is greeted by an older couple. When he asks if Amanda is home, he gets an unexpected reaction from the couple. The woman begins to cry, and the man tells Carrie that Amanda is dead. Then the woman recognizes Carrie, and they ask him why is he there to torture them. Carrie leaves in a panic, not understanding what's going on. But before he leaves, he takes one last look at the house and gets the strangest feeling that he's been there before. He drives around wondering what just happened. He believes that the gap in his memory has something to do with it, but he just can't seem to remember. When he gets home, he decides to call Margot, the friend who hooked him up with Amanda, and find out what exactly is going on. He hangs up after no one answers, but before he can walk away from the phone, it rings. He answers it and hears the same strange voice from before, saying, "The ankle bone's connected to the foot bone. The foot bone's connected to the leg bone. The leg bone. The leg bone." The phrase repeats over and over as the voice becomes more shrill, until Carrie finally hangs up. Chapter 5. He was startled awake by the ringing phone. He shook his head, tried to focus his eyes in the bright morning light that evaded his room through the dust-coated window. Despite the cheeriness of the sunlight, his first feeling of the day was dread. The phone had become his enemy, and now it was summoning him before he was even awake. "Sean, get the phone," he yelled, his voice still hoarse from sleep. But it rang and rang again. He forced himself up from the tangled bedsheets, stubbed his toe against the leg of his counter, and grabbed the receiver. "Hello? Is this Carrie?" It was the blind date. "Yes, hi." He tried to shake the pain from his stubbed toe, but it continued to throb. "This is Mandy. Where were you last night?" Mandy? Her name is Mandy? Why had he changed it to Amanda? "I got the wrong address or something," he said, fumbling for an answer, knowing that he sounded like an idiot. It's a long story. I'm really sorry. I felt terrible." "I hope so," she said. Then she laughed. "I waited for you till about 10. How could anyone sound so sexy so early in the morning?" "I tried to call you," he said, starting to wake up. "I've never done that before, really. I mean, it's never happened to me before. I thought maybe you had car trouble or something," she said. "I'm real glad you called," he told her. "I hope you're not angry." Of course I am," she said. "I was looking forward to our date. After the big build-up Margot gave you." He could feel his face turning red. He was glad she couldn't see him. Compliments of any kind embarrassed him. He knew he wasn't anything special. With that purring voice, a compliment was almost more than he could bear. "I'd like to make it up to you," he said, forcing himself to be bold. "I'd like you to," she whispered. "Wow. What's your address anyway? Now that I'm not talking to you in the dark, maybe I'll get it straight." She giggled. "It's 42 Sizemore, near the old department." Sizemore? So close to Sycamore. But she must have said Sizemore over the phone that night. "I'm sorry, Mandy. I just blew it. That's all," he said, still thinking about how he mixed up her name and her street. He shook his head as if trying to scatter the clouds that had fogged his memory. "Let's start over again. I'd like that," she said softly. "I have an idea. I'm starting at Revere tomorrow morning.
Maybe you could meet me before school and show me around." "Sure," he said, a bit more enthusiastically than he intended. "That's a great idea." "I hope you don't think I'm being too aggressive," she said, suddenly changing her tone. "No, no, I like it," he blurted out. He felt his face turning hot and red again. Why did he feel so stupid talking to her? No one had ever made him feel this uncomfortable. "Just because I'm coming on to you doesn't mean I'm an aggressive female," she said. She laughed, so he laughed too. "Some boys get turned off by that," she added. You don't turn me off," he said. What a master of understatement. "That's the sweetest thing you ever said to me," she said. They laughed again. "I don't think of myself as aggressive," she went on, "but I don't always play by the rules either." What a fox. There was silence for a few seconds. He simply couldn't think of anything to say. He was completely awake now, that's for sure, and he wasn't even noticing that his stubbed toe was still scarlet and throbbing. He was only aware of her voice, her whisper, her laugh, and how uncomfortable she was making him feel, and how he didn't mind feeling so uncomfortable. "I have to get off," she said, breaking the silence. "But before I go, tell me one thing about yourself." One thing. Think fast, Carrie. Man, he hated being put on the spot like this. One thing. Well, he cleared his throat. "Some people tell me I look like Ralph Macchio. You know, the guy in the movies?" Silence. He could hear her steady breathing, but she didn't say anything. Tell me one thing about yourself," he said, pleased with himself for thinking of it. "Well," it was her turn to think fast. "Well, I'm really turned on by guys who look like Ralph Macchio," she whispered. "Bye." "No, wait." He practically screamed into the phone. "Mandy, tomorrow morning before class, how will I know you?" "Don't worry," she said. "I know you." She hung up. He realized he was soaking wet from perspiration. He pulled off his pajama shirt and flung it onto the bed. He started to pull open the window to allow some cool air in, and the phone rang again. He smiled. "She just can't leave me alone," he said aloud. He grabbed the phone. "Hi again." "Sticks and stones will break your bones. Are you ready to die? Are you ready?" The nasal, rasping voice screamed into his ear, then hung up before he could reply. Was it Sharon Spinner? The voice was too disguised, too distorted to tell. He put the receiver back on the phone, his hand shaking. Got to think about this calmly, he told himself. He thought about Sharon. She was always such a Miss Perfect, leader of the cheerleading squad, homecoming queen, treasurer of the student council. She was always dressed in style, not too showy, but just right, preppy and neat. She didn't seem to have the personality of someone who would make such threatening calls. She didn't really have much of a personality at all, Carrie decided. She was just a nice girl, pretty in a typical sort of way, friendly, but not terribly bright or interesting. But she had threatened him in front of everyone. His mind flashed back to the chaotic scene on the practice field, with Sal laying on his back, his eyes closed, his legs stretched out at that weird angle, and Sharon kneeling over him, holding Sal's head in her hands, her cheerleading outfit all twisted, her hair flying all over her head. He saw her angry face, saw the fear and disbelief in her eyes. "How could you?" she screamed at Carrie. "You've ruined his life. How could you?" And then later, in the backseat of the car O'Brien was driving, she had stuck her head out of the window. Carrie saw again the wild look on her face, remembered the hatred with which she had spit out her words. "I'll pay you back, Carrie. I'll pay you back." It had to be Sharon, he decided. Her life had been so neat and ordinary, so typical, until he had accidentally changed it all. He had invaded her safe, normal life. Maybe it was the first time someone had done that to her. And now she was striking back, paying him back with these ugly phone calls. He picked up the phone. He had to talk to her. If she'd only let him explain what had really happened. He put the phone back. He decided to wait until he saw her in school. She'd never stay on the phone with him. Maybe if he could confront her, talk to her face to face, she'd listen. He showered and dressed without really paying any attention to what he was doing. Faces appeared and faded in his mind. Sal, his face twisted in pain. Then Sharon again, replaced by the sad couple at the house on Sycamore Street. He tried to shut them out, to think about Mandy, but he didn't have a face for her. Didn't have an image to use to block out the faces he didn't want to see. He clumped down the steps, walked through the dark living room to the kitchen, and found his father at the table, reading the newspaper. "Morning." "Morning," Lieutenant Hart repeated without looking up. "Where's Sean?" "Sean?" His father peered over the top of the newspapers. "You don't really expect to see Sean before noon on a Sunday, do you?" Carrie looked up at the kitchen clock, a brass frying pan with black numerals around the bottom. It wasn't quite 10. "I guess not," he said quietly. "There's coffee on the stove," his father said. "I'll just have some cereal." Carrie walked over to the cabinet and took down a bowl. "Murdoch's still in a coma," his father said. Carrie dropped the bowl. It clattered loudly on the countertop and dropped to the linoleum. "How do you know?" "It's in the paper. Page 1, his father said flatly. "What?" Carrie was annoyed that his father had chosen to be so matter-of-fact about this. "Does it have my name? Does it say that I was the one who broke his leg?" A long pause while his father finished what he was reading. "No." "My name isn't in it?" Carrie fumbled around on the floor for the bowl, which kept evading his shaking hands. "That's the least Stevens could do for you. Keep your name out of it. Donald was his best player, remember?" "Yes, I remember, Dad," Carrie said disgustedly, slamming the bowl on the counter. He practically tore the cabinet door off as he opened it to get the cereal box. "I haven't even had breakfast yet, and he's talking about Donald," Carrie thought. "Want to see the article?" his dad asked, folding the paper to hand it to him. "No," Carrie said angrily, more angrily than he had intended. "I was there, remember?" "Don't yell at me," his father said, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hands. "You're angry at yourself, not at me." "Just read me the headline," Carrie said, spilling cornflakes on the floor. "What does it say? Superstar quarterback ruined for life by bumbling idiot who should be murdered?" "Yeah, something like that," his father said, actually grinning. "Hey, don't tell me I made you laugh," Carrie said in surprise. "What do you want me to do, cry?" his father replied, quickly changing the mood back to grim. That was such a typical move by his father, Carrie thought. If a tiny human emotion happened to creep out, quick, cover it up. He decided he had won a small victory anyway. He had actually made the old man smile, something he hadn't done in a long, long while. "What about the headline?" Carrie asked, searching through the refrigerator for the milk carton. He finally saw it over the sink where his father had left it. "Read it yourself. I gotta get going," Lieutenant Hart said. He shoved the paper across the small kitchen table to Carrie. Carrie shrugged and picked it up. "At least it's on the bottom of the page," he said. "That's good," his father said. "Always look on the bright side." The headline read, "Revere quarterback in coma after breaking leg." Then a smaller headline read, "Season over before it begins for Panthers." Carrie crumbled up the paper and tossed it down on the table. His father finished the last drop of coffee in his mug and pushed himself up from the table. "You know, Donald probably would have—" He caught himself. He realized what he was doing. He stopped short. He pretended to cough. "What?" Carrie said testily, urging him on. "Go ahead. Finish that sentence, Dad," he thought. "Let's hear it. Let's hear what my fabulous brother would have done." "Nothing," his father said, wiping his mouth with an already stained napkin. "I gotta go in this morning. Some idiots broke into the granary last night, stole 24 sacks of grain. Can you imagine?" "What?" Carrie stared at his father. He hadn't heard a word. "Hey, can I ask you something? It's sort of about the law." His father put on his police cap, working to arrange it in just the right spot on his head. "Sure. Hey, how was your date last night?" Fine. It's great," Carrie said, blushing. "Listen, don't let your punk brother sleep all day, okay?" "Yeah, sure, Dad. But I'm going out. Josh and I are going to play a little one-on-one at the basketball courts behind school." "Try not to break his leg," Lieutenant Hart said. He grinned again. "Sorry, us cops have a sick sense of humor, I guess. It comes with the badge." "Dad, my question?" "Shoot. Is it against the law? Is it a crime to make weird phone calls? You know, call someone up and say weird things to them and threaten them?" "You mean make obscene threats?" "No, not obscene, really. Just threatening." "Sure it's a crime," Lieutenant Hart said, giving Carrie the once-over. "Who are you planning to call?" "Get serious," Carrie said. "It's this, friend of mine. Someone keeps calling him and saying weird things to him. Do you think the police would—" "Oh, a friend of yours," Lieutenant Hart said. "So it's just a teenage prank. Some kid with nothing better to do, huh?" "No, the police won't take that seriously. Kids do that all the time. Listen, be sure to wake Sean up before you go, okay?" "Yeah, okay, Dad. See you later." Lieutenant Hart was out the door before Carrie finished talking. Carrie smiled. That was the best conversation he had had with the old man in over a year. He gulped down his cornflakes, then quickly washed the bowl out in the sink. Just a teenage prank. His dad was right. He had to cool it. He had to stop letting the phone calls get to him like that. Sharon, or whoever it was, would get tired of it before long. Sure, it was upsetting, but what harm did it do, really? Just a teenage prank. Carrie felt a little better. He grabbed his jacket and was out the door, and halfway to the bus stop when he remembered he had forgotten to wake up Sean. Lucky Sean, he thought, turning around and slowly walking back up the hill toward the house. The guy spends all of his time vegging out, not a care in the world. He doesn't even seem to care about Donald being gone. Or if he does, he sure knows how to hide it. He walked through the kitchen and living room and stopped at the foot of the stairs. "Hey, Sean! Sean, wake up, okay?" he yelled. Silence. "Sean, I know you hear me. Wake up. It's Christmas. Come down and see your toys." Came the sleepy reply. "In your face," Josh cried, leaping over Carrie toward the basket, pushing the ball down to the hoop for a slam dunk. The ball missed the hoop, missed the backboard, missed everything, and bounced away across the empty court. "Nice shot, Ace," Carrie yelled, chasing after the ball, which had rolled all the way to the tall metal fence. "You're as good at round ball as you are with a football." "At least I'm still on the team," Josh said. He grinned and crossed his eyes. Only Josh would get away with a line like that, Carrie thought, but he still heaved the ball as hard as he could at Josh's stomach. Josh dodged away, hitting the asphalt, and the ball soared over him. "Nice pass," he said. Carrie pulled a handkerchief out of his jeans pocket and wiped the sweat off his forehead. The basketball courts behind the school had to be the hottest place in the entire town. For some reason, the sun always beat down with a vengeance here, even when it was cool everywhere else, and the soft asphalt reflected up the heat. Carrie didn't mind. It felt good to move and sweat. It was a beautiful, clear day, so clear you could see all the way to the top of the hills from the basketball court. One of those summer days that come in the middle of autumn and lull you into thinking that the winter cold will never arrive. He and Josh played hard, and terribly. "You're supposed to hit the front of the backboard, not the back," he told Josh at one point. "Now he tells me?" was Josh's reply. They didn't talk much. The only sounds were the bouncing of the ball against the asphalt, the soft clip of their sneakers as they ran and shuffled, and the cries of some freshmen who had a game going on the far court. "Here comes Dr. J," Josh yelled, giving Carrie a body fake to the right and leaping left, sailing up to the basket, and forgetting to let go of the ball. He came down with the ball cradled in his arm, shrugged, and then froze. "Hey, Hart, almost forgot, your blind date." He let the ball roll away and slapped himself on the forehead. "What about it? How is she? How could I forget? How could you forget? Come on, man, spill." Carrie knew this moment was coming. He was surprised it had taken Josh so long to remember to ask about it. He went after the ball, scooped it up with one hand, and began dribbling around Josh. "Come on, Hart, how'd you make out? Forgive the pun." "The date was postponed," Carrie said. He tried to look mysterious. It wasn't going to be easy to pull this off, but he really didn't want to get into it with Josh. There was no way he wanted to tell him about the wrong address, the wrong name, and the couple that was so horrified to see him. Carrie was certain that Josh knew something about the tragedy of the previous year. Most likely, Josh knew a lot more about it than Carrie did, since the entire year was nothing but a gap, a blank spot in Carrie's memory. But they never talked about it. Josh understood that it was something Carrie had to work out himself, in his own time. The fact that Josh never mentioned anything about Donald or what had happened was one of the reasons the two of them had been able to remain close friends. Carrie knew he wouldn't feel comfortable with anyone who wanted to talk about all the things he didn't remember, or who wanted to help him remember. "Postponed? You dork, you chickened out." "No, I didn't," continuing to dribble in wider and wider circles around his friend. "It was postponed." "Tell me another one." Josh made a stab at the ball and missed. "I'm meeting her before school tomorrow morning to show her around," Carrie said. "And you didn't go out with her last night, even though every word she said cried out, 'Carrie, I want your hot bod'?" "We just didn't get it together," Carrie said, which was totally true. He pumped and sent up a layup. It hit the side of the hoop and ricocheted off. "That's the whole story?" Josh still couldn't believe it. Carrie didn't blame him, but he'd just have to believe it. That was all he was going to get. Josh started to dribble the ball, got his legs tangled, and fell on top of it. "Hey, I think I'm starting to get the hang of this game," he said. "So she's starting at Revere tomorrow?" "Yep," Carrie said, helping Josh up. "We had a long talk this morning." "Did you mention me?" "Of course not. Why would I mention you?" Carrie said. Why do you do anything? Josh replied. I can't believe you had a date all set up with this girl and you... He was interrupted by a boy's voice at the far end of the courts yelling, There he is! Carrie and Josh looked up to see 4 guys running toward them. As they came closer, Carrie realized that all 4 of them were wearing yellow and black Panther sweatshirts. The guy in the lead was carrying a football under one arm. Hey, Bugner, Josh yelled. O'Brien, thought you guys would be reading the paper on Sunday morning. What happened? Did the funnies confuse you? Along with Bugner and O'Brien, Carrie recognized Malik and Henderson, all from the football team. Carrie felt his stomach knot up and his heart begin to pound. All 4 of them were running right toward him, determined, and ugly looks on their faces. Chapter 6. We warned you to keep away from here, creep, Malik yelled at Carrie. He took the football and heaved it. The ball bounced hard off Carrie's chest. He cried out, more in surprise than in pain. We're not bothering anyone, Carrie said, taking a step back. You're bothering me, Malik said. His red hair and freckled face usually made him look like a little boy, but now he was sneering, showing all of his teeth. His eyes narrowed menacingly, his big, freckled hands making and unmaking fists, and there was nothing cute or boyish about him. You're bothering me too, Bugner said, trying to sound as tough as Malik and almost pulling it off. Don't be a copycat, Josh called to him. Bugner raised a fist. You keep out of this, Goodwin. He spat on the ground. We don't have anything against you, except your choice of friends. Carrie looked around for another escape route. He figured the wisest move here was to run. These former teammates hadn't come running up for a chat. He realized at once that he was trapped, surrounded on 3 sides by the high metal fence. The only exit was across 2 basketball courts. He'd never make it. He looked up at the sun, white and pure in a cloudless blue sky, and he felt a strange surge of power. He made up his mind. He wasn't going to run from these guys. He suddenly felt as pure and strong as the white sun. He knew he was right. He knew what he had to do. He would stand and fight them. He looked down, the sun's glare still white in his eyes. Malik came at him first. Carrie heaved the basketball at Malik's head. Malik ducked, right into Carrie's left fist. Malik's jaw made a crunching sound as it made contact with Carrie's powerful fist. Fist of steel! Carrie yelled in a voice he'd never heard before. Malik gasped in surprise and began to choke. He staggered toward the fence. Carrie ran after him, spun him around, and smashed his right fist into the other side of Malik's face. Malik dropped to the asphalt, choking and gasping for air. Hey, he's got some punch, he heard Bugner say to O'Brien. It was a lucky punch, O'Brien yelled, lunging at Carrie. Carrie dodged away quickly, turned, and landed a slashing karate chop on the back of O'Brien's neck. O'Brien's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he slumped helplessly to the ground. He's tough, O'Brien muttered over and over. You ain't seen nothing yet, Carrie cried. He ran over to O'Brien, scooped him up off the ground, and held him high over his head like a sack of flour. He felt another surge of power. His arms crackled with electricity. O'Brien felt light as a feather. With a cry of triumph, Carrie tossed O'Brien onto the attacking Bugner and Henderson. They both yelped in pain and astonishment as the heavy body fell on top of them, sending them sprawling backward to the ground. Nice toss, Ace, Josh called from the sidelines. We give. Please, stop, pleaded Bugner and Henderson. Stop it, another voice, a female voice, called from the far end of the tennis courts. Bugner and Henderson struggled out from under O'Brien and scrambled to their feet. Groggily, O'Brien tried to sit up. Malik staggered to the fence and held himself up against it, still gasping in pain. Everyone turned to watch the girl running toward them, yelling, Stop! Stop it right now! It was Sharon Spinner, Sal's girlfriend. She ran up to Carrie and put a hand on his shoulder. It took her a few seconds to catch her breath. What's going on? What are you doing? She asked. She didn't wait for an answer. Sal's fine. He just called me. He's going to be okay. That's great news, Carrie cried happily. He told me to tell everyone that it was an accident, Sharon said, her hand still resting on Carrie's shoulder. It wasn't Carrie's fault. Sal said everyone has to know that. There was a moment of surprised silence while everyone let her words, Sal's words, sink in. I guess I owe you an apology, Sharon said, looking down at the ground. I guess we all do. She gave Carrie a quick, soft kiss on the cheek. Yeah, I guess we do, O'Brien said, climbing to his feet. He walked over and shook Carrie's hand. Sorry, Hart. No offense, man, Malik said, rubbing his broken jaw. Yeah, no offense, man, Bugner and Henderson echoed. Let's not talk about it any more, Carrie said, feeling warm and happy. Let's let bygones be bygones, okay? He smiled. He looked up at the sun, white and pure, The pure white light flowed through him. Still smiling, he looked down. Sharon was gone, vanished into thin air. He blinked again. The 4 angry football players were coming toward him, ready to attack. "What are you smiling about, you little punk?" Malik demanded. He wasn't injured anymore. None of them were. There had been no fight. What a time to be daydreaming, Carrie thought. But what a fantastic daydream. The white glare of the sun still clouded his eyes, but he was back in the real world now. "Sal's in the hospital and you're smiling?" Malik said bitterly. He raised a big fist and took a step toward Carrie. "Now, wait a minute, Malik." Carrie bounced the basketball hard against the asphalt. "Sal will tell you it was an accident. Why can't you get that through your thick head?" "Sal isn't here to tell us, is he, Hart?" O'Brien said. He pulled up the sleeves of his sweatshirt as if preparing to fight. "Let's pause for a few moments of non-violence," Josh said. Carrie could see that he was looking for an escape route too, and coming to the same unpleasant realization that Carrie had. The freshmen on the next court had broken up their game. They were all leaning against the far fence, watching in silence. O'Brien shoved Josh hard, then shoved him again. "Take a walk, beak face." Josh looked as if he was going to say something, then thought better of it. He backed away. "Listen, there are witnesses here," he said finally. "You guys aren't going to get away with anything. You might as well—" "Get away with what?" O'Brien demanded. "You mean get away with this?" He reached his arm back as if cocking a rifle, then shot it forward and gave Carrie a powerful thrusting punch in the solar plexus. Carrie choked and dropped to his knees. "What are you guys trying to prove, that you're Neanderthals?" Josh cried, his voice rising a pitch or two. "Leave him alone." "Shut up, Goodwin," Bugner said. He turned and pulled Carrie, who was still gasping for breath, to his feet. Then he swung a punch that just missed Carrie's right eye. Blood poured from the cut it opened on Carrie's cheek. O'Brien grabbed Carrie by the shoulders, as if propping him up into position. Then he slugged him hard in the mouth. Carrie's lips split. His face was covered with blood. "Hey, that's enough," Malik cried, looking nervously toward the freshman ball players, who were still leaning in silence against the far fence. "It was just an accident, Hart." The 4 of them laughed heartily at this joke of Malik's. "Hey, you hurt my hand with your face," O'Brien yelled angrily, holding his right fist tenderly to his left hand. He wheeled around and drove his left fist deep into Carrie's stomach. Carrie moaned and slumped to the ground, breathing noisily, blood pouring from his face. "It was an accident," Bugner repeated. "Just an accident." O'Brien pointed a threatening finger at Josh, who was standing unsteadily, white with fear, by the fence. "You'd better keep your big mouth shut, Goodwin. You never know when another accident might happen, do you?" Josh was too upset to reply. He looked away. The 4 football players slapped each other's hands as if they had just scored a winning touchdown. Then they trotted off together across the court, grim-faced but victorious. Josh leaned against the fence, lowered his head, and had the dry heaves. It took a long time to get his stomach under control, and when he finally stopped heaving, he was too dizzy to walk. He took several deep breaths, felt a little better, and hurried over to help Carrie, who still lay choking on his own blood, his eyes closed on the hot, steaming asphalt. Chapter 7. He got to school early the next morning, before 7:30. There was no one waiting for him outside the building. He walked around to the side and looked up and down the parking lot. No one. He went inside. His footsteps echoed off the tile walls in the empty corridor. There was a girl standing beside his locker. She was tall and had very light blonde hair. She was wearing a plain blue dress, sort of a smock. He walked up to her and tried to smile, but his swollen lips wouldn't cooperate. He saw that she had a ribbon in her hair, red and yellow hearts, the kind of ribbon a little girl would wear. Her eyes were pale blue, almost gray. They were translucent. They seemed to be painted on, like a doll's eyes. Everything about her was light and pale, except for her lips. Her mouth was wide, pulled open in a wide grin, and she wore dark purple lipstick, which looked even darker and more out of place against her powder white skin. He thought she looked a little like Alice in Wonderland, except for those purple lips. "Hi, are you Mandy?" It was an effort to talk. Every word made his entire face hurt. "Mandy?" She looked at him as if he were a piece of spoiled fish. "No, I'm Sarah Beth Hoskins. Who are you?" Her dark lips formed a sneer. He stood in stunned silence for a long moment. "Oh, sorry." Then she laughed, and he recognized the laugh. "I couldn't keep a straight face," she said, putting a hand on his shoulder. She gave his shoulder a little squeeze and dropped her hand. Her hands were tiny, he saw, like a doll's hands. "It's nice to meet you finally, Carrie." Her voice was softer and smaller than it had been on the phone. "Yeah," he said. still feeling the squeeze of her hand on his shoulder. Such a strange thing to do, he thought. "You look disgusting," she said, examining his face. I fell out of bed this morning." "Do you live on the edge of a cliff?" She laughed. He tried to laugh, but it made his stomach and his side ache with pain, so he cut it short. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice filling with sympathy. "No, not much," he lied. "Well, it's killing me," she laughed. Where did that loud, dirty laugh come from? Carrie wondered. Her voice was so soft, so kittenish. He decided that her mouth belonged on a different face, but he liked her sense of humor. "Please, don't make me laugh," he said, holding his side. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, biting her lower lip. "I have a rotten sense of humor, I'm afraid." He started to protest. "But I have some very good qualities, too," she added. Her purple mouth formed a sly smile. It was very sexy, especially on that pale, innocent face. Carrie tried to smile back, but it made the bruise on his cheek throb. He really was in bad shape. It was nearly impossible to drag himself out of bed, and for a few seconds he had considered staying home, laying around for the day to try to heal. But he couldn't stand her up again. No way. He had actually screamed when he tried to wash his face. The warm water burned like acid, but it was worth it. He was glad he had forced himself to come to school. He looked at Mandy, so pale, so paper pale in the dim corridor light, those flat blue eyes looking back at him. He decided she was beautiful, in an unusual sort of way. "I want to apologize again for Saturday night," he said. "Okay, go ahead." "I apologize?" "Very eloquent," she said. "Apology accepted. Now how about my tour? The school is bigger than I thought. How many kids go here?" "I don't know." "Well, I can see I'm going to learn a lot on this tour," she said, and she took his arm. Her little hand felt cold. Good. She must be nervous too, Carrie told himself. "Where should we start?" he asked, a little uncomfortable with her holding on to him. "Whose homeroom are you in? Did they tell you?" 302, she said. "Hopewell. He's all right. He makes bad jokes about the morning announcements and laughs at his own jokes. But you don't have to listen. Here, I'll show you where 302 is. Then I'll show you the cafeteria and the library." A few early birds had begun to arrive. The silence of the halls was interrupted by the clanking of locker doors and the slam of books being dropped into them. Two girls Carrie didn't know walked by, giving them wide, open-mouthed stares. Carrie decided they must make quite a sight. This tall, blonde girl in the old-fashioned blue smock, and him with his head all red and puffed up like a salami. "You just passed 302, she said, pulling on his arm. "Oh, sorry." He shook his head as if trying to get his brain to work. "I'm a little out of it this morning." "Maybe we should just sit down somewhere," she suggested. "Like in the nurse's office?" "I'm okay," he said quickly. "Here's the cafeteria. No one eats here if they can help it, but sometimes you don't have a choice." "Gee, sure is green, isn't it?" she said, squeezing his arm. "I don't think I've ever seen a room that green." "It looks even greener after lunch," he said. He smiled. It didn't hurt that much. Maybe his face was loosening up. Or maybe she had a healing touch. "Where'd you go before here?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise her. Her eyes grew wide for a second, and her mouth formed a bright O. "I went to a private school. A very private school," she said, turning to watch a girl with pink hair and a fake leopard skin jacket who walked by. "Where?" "What?" She seemed distracted. "Where was the school?" "In a very private place, of course." She laughed. "You wouldn't know it." "Where are you from?" "A lot of places. I've moved around a lot. Now I'm from here." "Well, I can see I'm going to learn a lot on this tour," he said. She laughed and pulled herself closer to him, her dress rubbing against his side. "I like to be mysterious," she said in a mysterious movie spy sort of voice. "You're very good at it," he told her. "Compliments will get you everywhere," she said, pulling away from him and letting go of his arm. "Where are we?" "That's the vice principal's office," he said. "What kind of vice does he offer?" She smiled at him, leaned close, and rested her head on his shoulder for just a second. It was a simple, innocent-seeming gesture, but it drove Carrie absolutely wild. How will I ever be able to think about anything else but her? He asked himself, realizing that he was being captivated, that she had managed to completely win him over with just a few smiles and touches. Was she doing it deliberately? Carrie decided she was clinging to him so much because she was insecure. It wasn't easy to start at a new school, especially if you were used to a place that was very different, and Revere was about as far from an exclusive private school as you could get. Why, only about 20% of the kids who graduated went on to college, and most of them went to 2-year colleges nearby. And obviously, she had come from a place where kids dressed a lot more formally. "You were in a fight, weren't you?" she said suddenly, almost accusingly. "Yeah, I was almost in it," Carrie said, the memory of it rushing back, the crush of fists against his face, the gasping for air. He let out a small sigh. "Do you often do such macho things?" she said provocatively. "Every day," he said sarcastically. "I like a good fight before breakfast. It wakes me up in the morning." "You're not very good at sarcasm," she said, her dark lips frowning. "I'm starting to get better at it," he said. He realized he was trying to be as mysterious as she was. "Look, Mandy, I really don't want to talk about it. There was a misunderstanding, and some guys here think I did something that I didn't, so they beat the crap out of me. It wasn't too macho or interesting or anything. I'll tell you the truth, it was the first fight I was ever in my whole life, and I just hope that—" "Is that the gym?" she interrupted. He realized that she hadn't heard a word he'd been saying. "Is there a boys' gym and a girls' gym?" He scowled. He was hurt that she had gotten so easily distracted. What had happened to him was pretty dramatic after all. She didn't have to smother him with sympathy. They had just met, but she could at least pretend to listen. "No, there's only one gym," he told her. "Everything is co-ed here." "I like that," she purred, sounding sexy again. "There was a bond issue last year to add a swimming pool, but it was voted down. Everything having to do with Revere gets voted down." He opened the door, and the familiar gym smell greeted them both. She looked at her watch. He couldn't figure out if she was bored or just nervous about her first day. He decided she was nervous. "It's almost time for the bell," he said. "You can walk me back to my locker. It's near your homeroom." She gave him a warm smile that spread across her face. They made their way through the crowded, noisy hallway that a few minutes before had been theirs alone. "Hey, Hart, where'd you get that fat lip?" He didn't see who was calling to him. "Is that your face, or did you forget to take out the garbage?" "You've got nice friends," Mandy said, yelling above the roar of shouting voices and slamming lockers. "Everyone's a comedian," Carrie muttered. "What? Never mind." They turned a corner and stopped next to his locker. "Your room is right over there, remember?" he said. "It was so nice of you to come early and show me everything," she said, lowering her eyes. Then she grabbed his hand and shook it, her cold little hand grasping his tightly, almost too tightly. I wanted to meet you," he said. "Listen, there's a dance here Sunday night, some sort of autumn dance or something." "I'd love to," she said. She gave him the warm, wide smile again. "I'll be your blind date 1 week late." "Good deal," he said. The hall was nearly empty. Most kids were in their home rooms. "Do you think you'll be able to find the house this time?" she asked. "I'll tell you what, I'll meet you here after school." She didn't seem to want to leave. The thought that she wanted to stay with him made Carrie smile. "Good idea," he said. "Well, I guess I'll see you," she said slowly. She's beautiful, he thought. She's unusually beautiful. He turned and opened his locker. "Oh no," she screamed. "I don't believe it," he cried. They both stared at the inside of his narrow locker, at the locker walls, at his notebook and his textbooks, all smeared, all covered with blood. She grabbed his arm and squeezed it tightly. She stared at him, her blue eyes filled with concern and confusion. "Carrie," she said in a trembling voice, "is someone out to get you?" Chapter 8. The blood turned out to be red paint, but that didn't make Carrie's day any easier. First, he had to be excused from homeroom to go to the principal's office and see about getting new textbooks. The principal, Mr. Conquest, was normally a mild-mannered, almost wimpy sort of guy who always wore ragged gray cardigans several sizes too large and walked around with an unlit pipe in his mouth. But he became enraged when Carrie told him why he needed the textbooks. "This is not a practical joke," Conquest said, slamming the bowl of his pipe against his desktop dramatically. "This is an act of vandalism. I cannot tolerate wanton acts of violence on our school property." Carrie sat uncomfortably across from the principal's desk, his face aching and swollen, red paint on his hands. "Yeah, I agree," he said quietly. But when Conquest demanded if Carrie had any idea who might have poured the paint into his locker, Carrie just shrugged. "What happened to your face?" Conquest asked, leaning closer. "That looks nasty." "It feels nasty," Carrie muttered. "I was in a fight." "You seem to be having your share of problems," Conquest said, still staring into Carrie's face. "You sure you don't want to talk to somebody? It helps, you know." He wasn't a bad guy, Carrie decided. He actually seemed like a human, something no one expects in a school administrator. "I don't think it would help," Carrie said. "It's something I have to work out on my own." Conquest stared at him in silence. He picked up the pipe and slapped it gently against his open palm. "Maybe we should have an assembly to talk about the vandalism that was done," he said thoughtfully. "No!" Carrie jumped to his feet. Conquest pulled back, startled, and almost toppled over backward. "Please," Carrie said. "It would only cause more trouble. I'll take care of it. Really, I will." "You seem to be doing a fabulous job so far," the principal said, regaining his balance and his composure. "This has to do with that accident on the football field last week, doesn't it?" Carrie nodded. "The Murdoch boy came out of his coma," Conquest said, sucking on the pipe stem. "Oh, that's great," Carrie cried. "It was just shock trauma. It happens. He'll be okay now. Except for the leg, of course." "Great," Carrie repeated. It was the first good news he'd heard in a while. "They're not allowing him to have visitors for a few days, but that's understandable. Listen, Carrie, we'll get you a new set of textbooks, and we won't do anything about the malicious attack on your property." "Thanks, Mr. Conquest. But if anything else happens, I want you to come tell me about it. Is that a deal?" "Okay," Carrie said, getting up. What else could he say? For an instant, he thought of telling Conquest about the threatening phone calls, but he quickly decided to leave well enough alone. What could the principal do about it anyway? Call an assembly? That would really do a whole lot of good. He thanked Mr. Conquest again and backed out of the office. When he reached the hall, the bell for class change rang above his head, practically startling him out of his shoes. He turned and began walking toward his first class, and bumped right into Sharon Spinner. "Ouch!" she yelled. She was overreacting. He hadn't really bumped her that hard. "Jerk, are you going to break my leg now?" "Sharon, I want to talk to you." "Well, that makes my heart go pity-pat. Did you know that Sal is awake?" "I just heard," Carrie said, hurrying up to keep up with her as she walked as quickly as she could down the hall. "I'm so glad. Have you talked to him?" "Not yet," she called back to him. "They won't let him take any calls or see anyone until tomorrow." "Sharon, I've got to talk to you about the phone calls." She didn't stop walking, but Carrie took it as a good sign that she was talking to him at all. She still seemed angry, but her anger appeared to be in control. "What phone calls?" "I think you know what I'm talking about." She spun around angrily, bumping into two other kids who happened to be walking at her side. "I don't have the time or interest for any stupid mysteries, Hart," she said, clenching her teeth and narrowing her eyes. "Who do you want to call, anyway?" "Sharon, the calls?" The bell rang. "Leave me alone," she yelled, turning and running toward room 234, at the end of the nearly empty hall. "Just leave me alone. You've done enough." She disappeared into the classroom. Miss McCordy poked her gray head out the door and stared at Carrie. "You're late, young man. Where's your class?" He couldn't remember. It was one more great moment to add to what was becoming a monumentally lousy day. He thought about Mandy through all of his classes and through his 2 study halls. It kept his mind off everything else. A lot of kids weren't talking to him because of what they thought he had deliberately done to Sal's leg. They made a big point of snubbing him so that he'd know their feelings. The kids who were talking to him only wanted to talk about how awful he looked. This wasn't exactly a subject he wanted to pursue. He looked for Mandy after his last class. He couldn't find her anywhere. He took the bus home, riding up to the hills, lost in thought, feeling sorry for himself, feeling very alone. Watching Sean lie on the couch, watching reruns of old sitcoms didn't make him feel any less alone. Sean could see that Carrie was feeling pretty low. He offered to switch off the sitcoms and put on MTV, a very generous offer for Sean, but Carrie declined and went up to his room. After a dinner of microwaved McDonald's hamburgers, Carrie went back up to his room. He decided to go to bed early. Sleep was the only escape from the aches and pains of his battered and bruised body. It was only 8 o'clock, but he fell asleep quickly. He had a vivid dream, a dream he had had before. He saw a bright blue sky streaked with ribbons of white, puffy clouds. The sky was reflected in the smooth waters of a gently flowing river. He and Donald were in a canoe on the river, Donald smiling lazily, rowing casually, his paddles moving slowly back and forth. Carrie, in contrast, was rowing frantically, desperately trying to keep up with Donald, even though they were in the same canoe. Their parents, both of them, stood together on the green shore, their arms around each other, yelling encouragement to the 2 brothers in the canoe, waving them on. Carrie felt wonderful. The sun beat down, making him warm and comfortable all over. The water splashed and sparkled as he and Donald moved the bright red paddles. Donald gave him a big grin. "You're doing it, kid. You're really doing it," he said, crinkling his eyes in that happy way. Donald was the only one in the family who could crinkle his eyes. Faster and faster, Carrie paddled urged on by Donald's words. Suddenly, he had a horrible realization. He knew without seeing it that they were headed toward a sheer drop, a steep, raging waterfall. He looked across the canoe at Donald. Donald grinned and continued paddling lazily, laying back and enjoying the hot, hot sun. Donald didn't know about the waterfall. "You're doing wonderfully, boys," their mother, her black hair fluttering freely in the rippling river breezes, called, waving to them from shore. Carrie realized that he was the only one who knew about the waterfall. He knew he should tell Donald, but he kept paddling furiously. The river flowed gently, but Carrie knew that they were only a few yards away from the drop, only a few seconds away from being hurtled over the steep waterfall. "Great, great, boys. I'm so proud," their father yelled, tipping his police cap in an exaggerated salute. Carrie kept paddling. He knew he should tell Donald now. He struggled with himself. He wasn't going to tell. Yes, he was. No. Why doesn't Donald know about the waterfall too? Why am I the only one? Closer, closer. The blue waters began to swirl and bubble up white and frothy. The call woke him from the dream. Would he have told Donald if the dream had continued? Would he have stopped paddling so furiously toward certain disaster? He shook himself alert and stared at the clock. It was 1 in the morning. How long had the phone been ringing? 1 o'clock in the morning. Another call. When would she stop? What was the point of this? He grabbed the receiver. He was going to keep her on the line this time. He was going to get through to her. Enough was enough. "Now listen," he screamed into the receiver, startled by his own anger and frustration. "Hey man, did you meet her? What was she like?" "Josh?" "Yeah, it's Josh. How quickly they forget. I was only out of school for 1 day, Carrie. Sorry, I was asleep. Dreaming, I guess." "Since when do you have to be asleep to be dreaming?" Carrie's heart was still racing. He took a deep breath. "Where were you today?" "Upset stomach." "Right, I believe it," Carrie said sarcastically. "You'd have an upset stomach too if you had to look at you," Josh said. "You feel any better?" "Aces," Carrie said. "Anyone decide to play handball with your face today?" "No, they poured red paint in my locker instead," Carrie said. "Cool." Josh was silent for a moment. Then he said, "At least you don't have to worry like the rest of us about being popular. You know everyone hates your guts." "Very funny," Carrie said, yawning. "Can I go back to sleep now that you've cheered me up?" "No," Josh insisted. "What about Mandy? I didn't call to talk about you. Did you meet her? Is she as sexy in person as she is on the phone? Or is she a bow wow with a great voice?" "I met her," Carrie said. He had been thinking about Mandy all day and all evening, but now it was hard to think of anything to say about her. "She's real nice." "Uh-oh," Josh said. "Nice, huh?" "She's sexy," Carrie admitted. "She's real different." "Is she hot for your bod, Carrie?" "Well, she's, what can I say?" I know. You're saving yourself for your wedding night. Hey, you've been real informative, Carrie. I should have dialed that city service number. At least I would have gotten the time and the temperature. Give me a break, Josh. I was asleep, and my head is throbbing. Hey, that's right, Josh said. You must have made some impressions on Mandy with a face that looks like a boiled cabbage. You really know how to hurt a guy, Carrie said wearily. Hey, did you hear? Sal woke up. He came out of his coma. When do you come out of yours? What? What did you say? Hey, I'm sorry. It was a joke, Carrie. It wasn't a heavy comment or anything. That's great about Sal, really. You're sure a little edgy tonight, aren't you? Edgy? I don't know why I should be edgy, Carrie said. I get beaten up. I get threatening calls every night. Someone fills my locker with paint. Don't forget that everyone at school hates your guts, Josh added. Right. Thanks. You're real helpful. They both laughed. Okay, Josh said suddenly. That was it. I just wanted to hear if you could still laugh. Good night. And he hung up. Carrie sat in the dark holding the receiver tightly in his hand. I've got weird friends, he said aloud. He climbed back into bed, his side aching, his face throbbing. He remembered his dream. Closing his eyes, he tried to bring it back. I wonder if Donald and I go over the rapids, he thought, frowning. He had had the dream before, several times that he remembered. Each time he woke up in a panic, still paddling desperately just a few yards from disaster. He never saw the outcome. Maybe there wasn't one. It took a long time to get back to sleep. He thought about Mandy. She seemed so distant in a way, even when she was holding on to him. He liked the way she touched him, and the way she took his arm. Even though they had just met, she seemed open, available, hungry. He probably could make it with her. Thinking about that excited him and kept him even further from sleep. What was it about her that was so different from the other girls at Revere? Well, it was the blue smock for one thing. It was so old-fashioned, so private school, so out of it. There wasn't anything trendy about Mandy, he realized. Not her hair, not her clothes. She didn't carry her books in a backpack that had... Hey, wait a minute. She didn't carry anything. He pictured her standing there by his locker when he arrived at school. Yes, she wasn't carrying anything at all, not even a pocketbook. He wanted to think about this more, to figure out what else was different about her, but he drifted off to sleep, a heavy, dreamless sleep, all black and silent and empty. When he came down the stairs the next morning, leaning against the banister because of the ache in his side, he was surprised to find his father waiting for him. He had his uniform on, but his tie was missing, and the collar was unbuttoned and open. His eyes were red-rimmed and circled with thick black rings. His lower lip trembled as he tried to greet Carrie. He put his arm around Carrie's shoulder and led him toward the living room couch. Uh-oh, Carrie thought. Something's up. He was right. I got some news this morning, his father said. His throat was fogged, but he didn't bother to clear it. News? Carrie said, feeling his stomach tighten. Yeah, I got a call early. I've been waiting for you to wake up. He kept his arm around Carrie's shoulder. Carrie felt as if his father was leaning on him for support, using Carrie to stay on his feet. He had never leaned on Carrie before. What is it, Dad? It's your brother Donald, Lieutenant Hart said. He's escaped.